this information really pertains to our region. So your region certainly is different, and I don't know what you're gonna see after this storm gets through here.
So Dave, do you see the presentation itself, or do you see the presentation, the presenter mode?
I see the first slide of the PowerPoint there, but I do not see like the list of people. So if someone else wants to join, can you see that, the list of people? Someone wants to join, you have to let them in.
Unfortunately, I can't.
Hold on a sec here.
Let's see. Oops.
I see your name with, you know, showing this New York State map.
Okay. I don't see that there's anyone else waiting to come in.
Okay.
Can you see that on my screen or no?
I can't see that, but if you can kind of watch to see if someone wants to join later.
All right. Okay, Dave, do you want to take it away?
So I guess, and you can advance the slides if we wanted to do that, right?
Yep.
All right. So I guess kind of what our plan was to have like a discussion or kind of a wide open question and answer period. And I guess I will, if people can unmute themselves, if people have something very specific, they really have questions about, interest in and stuff, please let us know. I mean, hopefully we've put together some stuff here that's going to answer those questions for you, but we could delve in a little bit deeper into some very specific topics if there's something that very specifically you're interested in. Does anybody have anything specific, or should we kind of just move forward? Okay, all right. Either people couldn't unmute or they're kind of waiting for us to kind of give them the whole load here. So I guess we're going to go back and forth here.
Yeah, I can kind of take over when we get to those slides that I added about a few slides in. You'll see those are just the ones that I kind of changed and added. So
this presentation here has evolved over a number of years. It first began with Dr. Larry Chase from the Animal Science Department at Cornell and myself speaking at some meetings that some local John Deere dealers were having. I think they're really having it more to show off some of their self-propelled choppers, but they wanted to have some educational component to it. So that's how it all started, and it has evolved and changed a multitude of times. Dr. Chase is now retired, Professor Emeritus, and but I've still we've kept his name on the title slide here just because he contributed a tremendous amount to this initially, and I've added some things to it, and Dr. Eric Smith has added some items to it as well. So we'll kind of go through this quickly. I guess I'd almost say just with a small group, just jump in if you've got some very specific questions as we go along. I think with a small group, that's the best way of handling any kind of questions. So when I think about corn silage harvest, I think about you know, what are our goals? And to me, it's to harvest and storage practices that minimize the loss in field tonnage and quality between the field and actually feeding it to the cow. And losses can vary quite widely. I mean, if your losses from the field to the feed bunk to the cow is 10%, you're doing extremely well. But they can be as high as 30% or even higher in some extreme cases. I'm sure not higher than that with the audience that we've got here today. Most of the people that had losses higher than 30%, those folks are usually not in business anymore because they've wasted a lot of resources and finances. So kind of the key points to think about is harvesting at the correct moisture content and maturity, processing, getting those kernels cracked open, filling fast, Basically, that's to kind of really exclude and keep the air out. Can't say enough about packing. We're going to cover some of that, some of the details on how you can kind of make an assessment of the job that you're doing. If you need to make some adjustments to do a better job packing. Sealing it with a cover, we'll talk about some of the different products that are out there and different practices people are employing, and what seems to work well and what doesn't. The use of inoculants, and we'll cover some of that information as well. We'll talk a little bit about feed out to kind of minimize spoilage, minimize secondary fermentation. Again, trying to get this feed basically through the whole process and basically in front of the cow. And how to minimize reheating. And of course, we always want to pay attention to safety. When we're operating lots of equipment with lots of people, a lot of machinery moving around, the chance for accidents certainly is there. So we want to be safe.
So I can kind of take over for the next couple of slides here as we're talking about my wheelhouse, which is the crop itself as it's growing. So at least in New York right now, or the conditions that we saw, tasseling generally occurred in mid to late July in most locations in our central New York and Mohawk Valley area. And of course, that is a date that that plays very heavily into how fast your silage crop is maturing. We've got corn that's denting currently and has begun to do so in the last week or so. And this year, with all the wet weather that we've had, we're over the last couple of weeks, we've started to see the leaf diseases that we'll see close to crop maturity. Northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot, and eye spot, especially eye spot, has been something that I've seen in just about every field, although it's not usually one that we're concerned too much about yield, and some nutrient deficiencies. And those we are thinking came about because of the wet spring. And as the corn plants were going through the early vegetative stages, with that wet ground, the roots did not have to go very deep. They stayed toward the surface of the soil. And so later on in the season, when normally they'd have nice deep roots to draw on those nutrients that are deeper in the soil profile, they just didn't have it. And so later in the season, even though you may have applied enough nutrition to your soil, you may have had enough fertility according to what your crop needed that year, the plants could just not access it because of the lack of root mass. And here are some examples of what we're looking at this time of year, which kind of doesn't play too heavily into the quality of your silage. If you saw gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, if you began to see these on leaves that were at or above your ear, then, and prior to, excuse me, if you were seeing these prior to tasseling, and in situations like this, at this prevalence prior to tasseling, you would be concerned about yield loss in those ears. I did not see that in our area. These came about a little bit later. And on the upper right, you can see some of those nutrient deficiencies that I was talking about. Lots of nitrogen, or at least symptoms of nitrogen deficiency. Nitrogen and potassium are nutrients that are mobile within the corn plant. So as the younger leaves toward the top of the plant need these nutrients, if the plant itself is lacking, if it's not able to find it in the soil, it will transport those nutrients to the younger leaves. This is not necessarily a terrible thing, again, unless this symptom starts to creep up at or above the ear. I did not see that too much this year too, but I did see these symptoms quite a lot. And so these start to tell us that, okay, the plant is maturing. It's really investing into the reproductive organ, the ear. So you're going to start to see these things pop up. And these generally just tell us that the crop is getting along and getting closer to maturity. With some of these diseases, again, doesn't quite play into silage harvest, but it's incumbent upon me to mention management of these diseases, primarily through rotation and resistant hybrids. So getting into growing degree days. So we should all be pretty familiar with growing degree days. At this point, this is the average daily temperature, subtracting the base temperature for corn development, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and 86 degrees Fahrenheit is the point where the corn development during that given day starts to cease. So we, of course, track it from planting date, but for silage, we're also tracking it from silking date. So this is what I have here for many of the locations throughout our region. Sorry, Maryland folks, I don't have your information here, but this can still be something that you can use, this sort of this information for your own farm. So depending on your hybrid, a shorter day hybrid is going to be, we're going to start this at 750. The longer day hybrids more towards 800, but silage corn needs about 750 to 800 growing degree days after silking to reach your whole plant dry matter of 32%. And your prime window of harvest is 32 to 38% dry matter. So that's the window that you're looking at. And under typical late season dry down conditions, we can expect the crop to reach 35% 4 to 7 days later, after this initial 32% at 750 to 800 growing degree days. And remember, we can expect, at least in our area, 20 to 25 growing degree days per day, even up to 30. And we saw this year where earlier in the season, we were right about the 30-year normal, which is below the 15-year normal for most of our locations. Cooler, wet summer. I wouldn't say necessarily cooler, but definitely wetter. And that, when we did get those rain events, that helped to lessen or at least limit the growing degree days that we accumulated just through the effects of precipitation on temperature in general and cloudiness and things like that. But since silking, since the middle of July, we are in some cases near record growing degree day accumulations since the middle of July. It's kind of trailed off recently, and obviously today is a cold, wet day. We're not going to get a lot of accumulation today, but this is kind of this is where we're at for a lot of places. Canastota in northwestern Madison County, pretty far along. Saratoga County, in fact, is pretty far along as well. And so by my color coding here, you can kind of tell where you're at. If you're at about 700 degree days, growing degree days, you better start making plans, because you'll be at your 35%. You'll be right in the middle of that window in about a week and a half from now. If you're just getting to 750 to 800, again, remember you can expect to be at 35% 4 to 7 days later. So you could be ready to harvest, depending on your hybrid, 2 days from now, 8 days from now, depending on what your actual growing degree day number is within this range. So this is right around 800. So you're at the upper limit of that, 32% target there. So you could be chopping pretty soon. So you really want to be on the ball, checking your dry matter out in the field. In this yellow area, you're going to be harvesting imminently, if not already. And by now in the red. It's either in the bunk or it's going in the grain bin at some point, because you could be, well, you're likely well above 35 and above that 38% range. You can still, depending on different strategies, you can still get away with it up to around 40% dry matter, but you've missed the prime window. And to really hammer home just how quickly you can go from being at the beginning of that 750 degree day window to 800 degree days. This is a chart that I put up. It's current as of yesterday. And just using, let's go easy and use Burlington, the one down at the bottom, the coolest range that we have here. Oh no, Burlington, here it is. So Burlington, and this is the line for Burlington. And so if your silk date was on July 19th, you're likely at around, you're at about 725, and this was yesterday. Sorry, excuse me. This was yesterday's total because we haven't totaled in today's growing degree days. So you're at 725 yesterday. You may have added 15 onto that. So you might be up to 740 today. But if your silk date was on the 14th, only 5 days earlier, you're already up to 825 growing degree days. So your window of hitting that target of really making your plans and getting ready to get out there is pretty short and pretty tight. So it could be only 2 days that you're actually within that 750 to 800 degree day window to know, all right, I need to make my plans because I'll be chopping in about a week or a couple days less. And of course, I mean, Saratoga, way up there already. And again, Canastota and northwestern Madison County. Even if your silk date was at the end of our range here, you're going to be chopping. Well, if you didn't already this week, well, you'll have to wait till after the rain passes. So does anybody need me to kind of go through how to find your growing degree days? Is that helpful to anyone? I can walk you through it. Otherwise, you go to climatesmartfarming.org and you click on the growing degree day calculator, type in your address, enter your planting date, which you will use for your silking date in this case. You'd use your silking date in the planting date for this calculator, and then it will give you your totals. So that's how that works. Very useful to get you in the ballpark of knowing just about when you might want to start getting out into the field and actually checking your dry matter in your own field. And so Dave, that's the end of my section.
Okay, so interesting. Yesterday I was out in a field in northern Shenango County and saw some eye spot on some corn. I was checking some fields with a producer. We weren't able to check dry matters, but milk line was about a third of the way down, and we'll talk about milk line a little bit later.
Oh, and Dave, if I can interrupt again real quick, sorry. I just wanted to mention that dry down ranges, it's on average a 0.5% a day. So if you're at 32% today, on average by tomorrow you might be at 32.5%. But that ranges from 0 to 1%. On the best, driest, sunniest, breeziest day, you'll gain another percent of dry matter. But on a day like today, it's cold, it's wet, it's rainy, you might think, oh, I'm accumulating all these growing degree days and I'm going to be beyond my window. Well, on a day like today, you very well might actually get no, like 0% increase in your dry matter percent. So that's something to remember there. So I just wanted to.
I've actually heard Joe Lawrence, one of our pro dairy staff, who's a forage specialist, talk about how on occasion, if it's been really dry and we get a good soaking rain, that actually dry matter can go the other way sometimes.
Aha.
Plant can actually get a little bit wetter. So anyway, a lot of variables there.
And I'm
So,
sure it's getting a lot wetter in
So
in
you can
certain parts.
back up a couple slides.
Whoops.
No, oh, one more. There we go. Okay.
Sorry about that, Dave.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Was there one more back? We're tag teaming here. No, okay. All right. So milk line, we'll talk about that. We used to think that was the method or the process that would give us kind of the most accurate information on when to harvest. But we found after a few years of monitoring that milk line at the same point under different conditions would give us different dry matters. So it's not as good as we used to think that it was. So lots of variation there. It can be used as a good index of when to start monitoring dry matter. The milk line is about 1/4 or more. That's the time to kind of start doing some check-in, doing some dry matters. We'll talk about how those can be done to see where you're at. But whole plant dry matter is the best indicator. We like to see average dry matter at harvest to run in the 34 to 36% range. I guess, the thing that's interesting to me, I don't have any problems seeing that dry matter up a little bit higher, 38, maybe 39. You've certainly done yourself a lot of good from a standpoint of maximizing starch accumulation out in the field. The danger is that if things get away on you and all of a sudden you're up at 40 and above, you can really have some fermentation problems and some palatability problems, some feed out problems with the cows. So it's a balancing act of getting the most out of the field versus risking kind of going too far and having some problems. I guess I've always said from the cow side of things, if you're going to err one way or the other from 35, it's safer for the cows to be a little bit on the wetter side, down to 31 or 32. You've likely given up a little bit up in the field. But you probably had pretty good fermentation. You had a good opportunity to pack the stuff well and doing fine. But that's why we kind of try to hit that happy medium of around 35. And I guess I'd say when it's drier, the longer you can hold that feed in storage before you start feeding it. In New York State, we generally say it's really ideal if you can not feed new crop corn silage until Christmas or New Year's. It really improves the starch digestion and the fermentation is totally complete and cows do a lot better, especially if it's a little on the drier side. So, okay, next slide.
Yep.
All right, so here's a picture here. And yesterday I had to kind of remind myself of which way to look at things. I think the crop guys have always got this in their head, but us cow guys have to kind of get back into gear. So this is an ear basically that was taken off the plant, husk was pulled off and it was broken in half. And so that line there is the milk line, the difference between the yellow and the more pale yellow or whitish kind of color that's down toward the cob. And it's going to go from basically the outside down towards the cob is how it's going to progress. And that line is going to be evident as you're looking toward the tip end of the ear. So you break it off, and basically as you went forward on this picture here, you're going to reach the point, the tip of where the silks would be protruding from the ear as it's on the plant. And the one thing I guess I have found over the years is that some varieties, not most of them, but occasionally you'll find a variety where the milk line is not very evident. And what I usually do is take a jackknife and take, well, first I'll also look just to be sure that it's all dented and stuff and we don't have any milky kernels that are left on the plant. But I usually take a jackknife and slice the kernel from the top right down to where it attaches to the cob. And then basically you can see the doughy material, the stuff on the top, and then you can see the juicy stuff on the bottom. So that's another way if you get into trouble actually being able to identify it on the plant. So anyway, all right, so how do you figure out whole plant dry matter? chop a number of plants. Some people will actually run the chopper a little ways into the field. Some of our agribusiness folks have these little portable units, these chippers that chop away stuff. But anyway, or just by hand, chop a few plants. Don't do it from the edge. Get into the field, run it through the chopper. Use either a Coster tester or a microwave oven. A Coster tester is going to usually give you 1 to 2 points higher than the actual dry matter. And I think a microwave is going to typically be in the same range. I find that with green corn that's not fermented, we tend to get a little bit of charring, a little bit of burning. And I think something about the fact that it's not fermented, the moisture doesn't want to come out of the cells. So it will start to char a little bit before it actually totally dries down. So if you get a reading that says 32, assume that it's like 33 or 34. We'll talk about some of these portable NIR units. They're getting better. There's some poor ones out there that are not very accurate, but they're getting better all the time. And we've got some people that are running around using these chippers and portable units, getting a lot of data very quickly. Actually, yesterday, I was talking to a farmer in Saratoga County, and I know that's one of the areas where our growing degree days tend to accumulate much quicker. Stuff is getting pretty close to getting ready over there. And they had a whole bunch of dry matters run, and they were running from 27 to 34%. So those units can be handy. They're not perfect, so you need to take it with a grain of salt. And as Eric said, the dry down rate is typically 0.5 to 1% a day. And it can vary. So anyway. Here's some pictures of some of these units. If you look at the bottom scale where it shows the range, it kind of shows you where some of these units operate. The visible range is on the left. The Aurora unit there in the on the top of that list there is one of the little better ones. The Skyo or Skyco, I guess is what you call it. Its accuracy is a little bit to be desired. But anyway, I guess I would say if you've got somebody that has one of these units, I guess I'd ask them a lot of questions, see how repeatable it is with the same sample. And again, kind of take it with a little grain of salt. But years ago, using NIR in a laboratory was kind of risky. So I think we're going to get there where we're going to be able to have some really good, reliable units out in the field. So that's a real plus. All right, so hitting our goals. We talked about this. Hopefully people don't need to skip around for different fields, but sometimes if you got short, long season varieties and there's huge differences in stuff, you may need to do that. I know it's not always practical, especially if you've got a custom operator. Was that farm I was on yesterday? They have a custom operator, and basically he said they want to start either this coming weekend or the beginning of next week. I told him hold them off as all you can. The flip side of it is if he tells them don't come now but come later, it may be a month before he gets back there, and at that point in time he's going to be in trouble because he's probably going to have 45% dry matter silage. So anyway, you got to kind of take all the practical situations at hand and make the best decisions that you can. So, all right. So what happens when we get really wet stuff? And wet, I'm talking less than 30% dry matter. We've given up some yield. There's no question about that, especially starch. We're going to have some increased runoff, especially from tall upright silos, more acidic fermentation. It can affect dry matter intake, which we know if we affect dry matter intake, it's probably going to affect milk production. A little less efficient fermentation and conversion of carbohydrates to heat and carbon dioxide. So we're probably going to lose a little bit more dry matter in the fermentation process. So all of those things are negatives for us from an economic standpoint, no doubt about it. Not only out in the field, but potentially even from the cow side of things, from a production standpoint. So when we're greater than 40%, well, we're not getting any more yield. We're going to have decreased starch digestion. even though we're using processors, or the majority of folks are using processors, and even if that processor is adjusted well, when the kernels basically get dry and mature, and the plant has actually had a black layer formation on the kernel, you get crystallization of that starch. And even though it may be processed well, the digestion of that starch is going to be reduced. There's no question about it. Lower fiber digestion, when we think about corn, basically corn is a grass. So think about it as basically a grass with corn grain in it. And as the maturity goes up, the fodder part of the plant, the fiber digestion goes down. So we're going to lose kind of on both ends of things here, from the kernels to the fodder. Increased risk for molds, more opportunity for those to get going in the field. And also the other aspect is that it's going to be more difficult to pack, and again, more opportunity for molds and spoilage, and less palatability, no question about it. And we're gonna suffer from the production side of things. So we want to be in that sweet spot. Chopper length, some of these here I'm going to skip over kind of pretty quickly. I think we can actually send you these slides here if you want them for reference, but here are some guidelines. 3/4 of an inch, a theoretical length of cut, is a good place to be at. I guess the one thing I would say is always consult your nutritionist from a standpoint of where you should be. Depending on the other ingredients that you're feeding, you may vary from this a little bit. I guess the one thing I would say is we always used to think that cows needed a lot of really long material. Some of the recent work up at Minor Institute in Shazy, New York, especially with processed corn, where we're busting up the cob, the kernels, we're finding out that, you know what, in the past, we used to chop some of this stuff longer. Cows would leave a lot of cobs in the bunk. Now, when they're eating all of that stuff, we can actually be better off a little finer than we used to be years ago, and the cows do perfectly well. If the stuff is really dry, if it did get away from you and it's 40% dry matter, I guess I'd say let's chop it a little bit finer. That's going to help us. Our rolls, our processing rolls, 1 to 3 millimeters. We'll talk about how to check a processing score. If you're using a Penn State forage particle separator, or your nutritionist is, here's some guidelines of where we want to see those numbers. We used to think, again, that we needed a lot more stuff on that top screen, and that's not the case. Some recent research has been telling us that. So, all right, let's go with the next slide here. All right, how about BMR? Dry matter at harvest, at feed out, we want to see it 33 to 35. It's going to tend to hold its moisture a little bit more. Theoretical length of cut, again, about the same. A little bit more on the top screen if we can get it. This stuff is highly digestible, the fiber. You know, it seems that every couple of years, a different seed company comes out with some varieties or some characteristics. And the common thing that you hear is like, well, it's just as good as BMR. Well, I'll tell you, I haven't seen any of those things that have come to pass. BMR certainly has its challenges in the field as far as standability and some yield drag, and the fact that cows are going to eat more. So there's oftentimes an inventory issue when we're thinking about BMR and those other issues. But when it comes to fiber digestibility, it's in a field of its own, so to speak. So anyway, a whole nother topic of itself. So the roll settings, 1 to 2 millimeters, and monitor the damage. And this here was from John Burlett, person who works for Mycogen, actually used to be the dairy specialist on our team here in Central New York. Got this info from him 6 years ago. Need to get an update from him, I guess. Okay, how about shredlage? All right, in the same ballpark, 34 to 36 dry matter. We're going to be longer with that stuff, 1 to 1 1/4 inch. More material on the top screen. We want to be sure we don't get a lot of sorting. You know, one of the features of this, if we were feeding some straw, some wheat straw for some physical fiber, shredlage should help us to be able to eliminate the need for that. But again, we want to be sure that cows aren't sorting this stuff. Roll settings 1 to 2 millimeters. And fiber digestibility, starch digestibility might be improved. We might get a little more milk. And I say we might because we're talking about some pretty subtle differences there. We've seen some trials and some work that's been done that showed a milk production response. We go back and we look at all the data, and we find out oftentimes that the kernel processing score was much better than the check diet that basically was not shredlage. So did we actually get better fiber digestibility, or did we get better starch digestibility? And is that where the extra milk came from when we did see it? And we haven't always seen that extra milk. But anyway, those units are out there. They're pretty popular. They do a great job. Just work with your nutritionist. Be sure you got all your T's crossed and I's dotted, no matter what kind of units you're using. And these units, things wear out. So don't just assume that it's doing the same job that it always has. All right, kernel processing. Again, to get more value out of that starch. And if we get enough, a little extra starch in there, we can get the rumen bacteria working a little bit better and sometimes actually get a little better fiber digestibility. Milk production responses in 22 studies was 1.1 pounds. And, you know, when you think about the price of corn grain, getting more value out of that starch, out of those kernels is pretty beneficial. There's more benefit when the corn is more mature and drier. And that makes sense. When we have really dry, hard kernels, if they're not processed, we're going to lose a lot. If we can process it, we're going to gain quite a bit. However, we do not want to purposely delay harvest and let it get dry because we have a processor. Remember, I talked about once those kernels get hard, the starch becomes crystallized, and even processed, we're going to lose some starch digestibility. Now, one of the things I guess I would say is that some of your custom operators will tout that fact that it widens the harvest window, and it does. But you don't want to be the guy that's on the custom harvesters list that's getting their stuff chopped at 45% dry matter. It's going to be a huge disadvantage for you. So, okay, let's move on. Processing score. So what we're doing is we're measuring the percent starch in the corn silage that passes through a 4.75 millimeter screen. So in the lab, you can have this test done in the laboratory. Here's the whole process, how they do it. So properly processed corn is going to have greater than 60% passing through that. And again, we know what we're looking for. We want better starch digestibility, less starch going to the lower tracts. We want to get more bang for the buck out of that feed. So, all right. Here's some data from several years ago. And I think this has changed. I should dig out some more recent information, but this was back in 12 and 13. And it was looking at the percent of samples that were adequately processed. And basically, this was Cumberland Valley Analytical Services. 36% of the samples were optimally processed, basically at about 70% or above. 51% were considered adequate, and we had 13% that were inadequately processed. So just because you have a processor doesn't mean that you're getting the value that you want. You've got to check these units. I just talked to a guy earlier today. He updated his unit. It was an update from the company that changed the differential speed of the rolls to hopefully do a pretty good job. And this is a guy I'm almost guaranteeing he's going to do a great job, because when we've worked with him in the past and we've done some measurements, he's had some of the best processing scores of anybody around. So he's being proactive, and that's what you need to do. Okay. And here's just kind of a follow-up from Charles Hansen lab looking at basically fecal starch. So this is a result of kernel processing score and fecal starch of all these different samples that were sent into the lab. And basically you can see on the left, the samples that had super high processing scores had the lowest fecal starch. There's a little chatter along the way, but there's a pretty good correlation there. And on the right, basically where we had lots of starch coming out in the manure, our processing scores were really, really poor. And probably some of those samples they weren't processed probably. So, I mean, the proof is out there. It's pretty black and white. So anyway, so kind of a quick and dirty, and this is what you're going to need to do out in the field. Pioneer and Charles Hanson have these cups. Basically, they're 32-ounce cups. And for reference, McDonald's largest soda is 32 ounces. So you can use that if you don't have one from your agribusiness folks. Fill the cup with incoming silage, spread it out on a flat surface. If you're doing this on the apron to the bunker silo, be sure you pay attention. You don't want to be run over by the next truck that's coming in. But basically pick out kernels that are greater than a half a kernel. If there's more than 2 of these, you need to make some kind of adjustment, either tighten the rolls, take a look at the rolls. Are they worn out? I mean, hopefully you're not at a point here where you're at the last minute going to have to change the rolls. Some people also use a Penn State forage box and basically kind of take a look at what the kernels look like as it's going through that box, how many whole ones that they have. So it's kind of a quick and dirty, but it's pretty good. It's actually pretty darn good. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about packing density. Here's some stuff that was done many, many years ago. And this was done by Kurt Ruppel looking at packing density and dry matter losses in the silo. And on the bottom, basically what we're looking at here is the pounds of dry matter per cubic foot, okay? And we'd like to be on the right-hand side of this chart here. So when you're down at 10, I mean, that's almost like dumping it in and hardly doing any packing whatsoever, just leveling it out. Our dry matter losses were as high as 20%. We get up to 22, our dry matter losses can be down to like 13, 14%. And there's some people nowadays that are getting packing densities up as high as 25, 26, 28 pounds of dry matter per cubic foot. And that goes a long ways from a standpoint of preservation and stability of silage. And we'll talk about how to achieve those. Here's basically kind of the formula in black and white here. It's looking at the packing weight of the vehicle or vehicles. With the self-propelled choppers, a lot of times, especially if they're not very far from the bunk silo, we're bringing in silage in at such a rate that one packing tractor cannot meet these criteria. So sometimes we need to put 2 tractors on there, maybe each with a blade, or maybe one with a blade and the other one just with a lot of weight on it. But you take the vehicle weight in pounds divided by 800, and that equals the tons per hour coming into the silo that you should not exceed. So basically a 12-ton tractor divided by 800, that'd be 30 tons per hour, which is pretty low for some of these big monster choppers. So anyway, you can take a look at your own data. Here's some kind of just quick and dirty guidelines of tractor weight in tons per hour. If you're bringing in 150 tons per hour, man, you need some heavy duty weight there to get the job done. And this is continually packing while the stuff is coming in. We want to use a progressive wedge, flatten it out as we go along, constantly packing shallow layers, 6 to 8 inches or less. Try not to disrupt any packed silage. If it's coming in so fast that basically you can only move the feed away before the next truck comes in, and that's basically how you're keeping up, you're not getting it packed well enough. Just here's some pictures of actually a dividing wall. So 2 silos side by side being filled simultaneously, 3 tractors, maybe there's even a 4th one up there. So depending on your situation, these are some of the things to take a look at. And you can see the weights on the back of these tractors here, at least 2 of them, concrete weights to add more weight to these tractors. All right, how about covers? So we've seen more people actually using plastic to more than cover just the top of the bunk silo, lining the walls, especially with these portable walls that have connecting seams that do not seal very well at all. And it's not an easy job. The wind blows, sometimes the plastic rips, all those kinds of things happen. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy as pie, but even with those obstacles, this really helps a lot from a standpoint of preservation, keeping the water out of the silage, and really preserving this valuable commodity that we spent a lot of money to produce. We're trying to keep the quality up and get it to the mouth of these cows. So here's some examples here. All right. We want to cover immediately when we're finished. And I know a lot of times you want to take a break, take a breather, cover it the next day. Don't do it. Cover it right away. We'd like to cover if rain is going to shut you down. I know sometimes that's difficult. Again, kind of use your best judgment and best situation. Tire to tire density. The goal is to basically keep that plastic sucked down to the silage so there's no air underneath that. We'll talk about some different processes as well besides tires here. All right, some of the covering options. Black plastic has been kind of the standard. Product called Silo Stop has come out many years ago. Product called Feed Fresh. There's other oxygen limiting covers. I wrote nothing with a question mark. Most of the people that were doing nothing are not in business anymore because their losses were so great that it was costing them lots of money. And most likely, if they weren't covering their silage, there were probably a lot of other management things. They were not doing very well either. The one thing I guess I would say from an industry-wide standpoint, these oxygen limiting barriers and products are becoming the standard. They do cost a little bit more money. There's no question about that. Think about what it costs you to grow this corn and preserve the quality, the thin margins you're operating on from a standpoint of milk production. We need to preserve every pound of this stuff that we can, and we need to preserve the quality of it. And these products have become kind of standard practice for many, many farms, and it's going more and more in that direction. I probably shouldn't have even put this in there. There was about losses uncovered. Here's some interesting things here, and how maybe relate these to some of the covers that are not very oxygen limiting. Here's some work that was done quite a few years ago. Looked at dry matter digestibility in silage that was covered versus no cover. So we're looking at 12.5. This is basically looking at the depth from the top, 12.5 centimeters or 25 centimeters. And look at the difference in the digestibility and the quality. Now, I'm not going to say that if you have a poor quality cover, you're going to see this effect, but there is no doubt the non-oxygen limiting covers, you're going to get some deterioration. Not only are you going to get some more dry matter losses, but you're going to get some deterioration down from the top, going down into the surface or into the depth of that silage. That's going to reduce your digestibility somewhat. And what we really want to do is we want to preserve that digestibility as well as we can. As our silage ferments and as we get spoilage, the stuff that goes away first is all of our sugars. That is the most valuable commodity these cows have. And so anything we can do to preserve that is going to be a great benefit to us. I mean, the losses basically eat up the most valuable part of the feed first, and we want to do everything we can to minimize that. So, so this is some stuff from the Cornell Nutrition Conference in 2008. Dr. Richard Muck, he used these. This was when the Silo Stop product just came onto the market. Checking its value on corn silage and alfalfa bunkers. They covered the walls with Silo Stop, and they used an 8mm plastic as a comparison. Most people are using 6mm plastic. But anyway, losses in the top 6 inches, 2 feet from the wall, were 19% for the plastic, 1% for the Silo Stop. This was in alfalfa. Once you got deep in the middle, there was really hardly any difference at all. Losses between 6 and 24 inches were similar. But he expects that with 6mm plastic instead of 8, the losses would be about 5% higher. So these are pretty substantial. And today we just can't afford to stand these losses anymore. We've got to be using some good oxygen limiting products and good management to preserve this feed. Here's a picture of, that was the picture of tire to tire. You know, if we're using a system where we're putting tires on it, we do like to have those tires or those sidewalls kind of touching. Again, we want to, if we have any billowing, that tells us that air is under there. And that's basically like the kryptonite to Superman. That air is the same thing to silage. We don't want to have any air under there. The next slide shows a bag system. And this is with a oxygen limiting product. I think this may have been a two-step process, but we want, again, you look, you see that plastic is tight down to the silage. Some of these products will almost stick to the silage like saran wrap, and that's what you're really looking for. No air under there. So let's talk real quickly about inoculants. Some work done by Keith Bolson at Kansas State. He did greater than 200 laboratory scale trials, 1,000 silages, 25,000 silos. He got positive results that were economically beneficial in greater than 90% of his trials. That's a pretty good batting average. And actually, all our folks here from Maryland, you have one of the most renowned experts in silage fermentation right next door, Dr. Lyman Kung out of the University of Delaware. And actually, some of the stuff I'm going to tell you here comes from the work that he's done here. So here's kind of a pictorial of what happens during normal fermentation. If we look at the graph on the bottom here, we take a look at oxygen, pH, bacteria, and a period of time. I mean, basically, we want to use up the oxygen, drop that pH, drive the bacteria levels up as the pH drops, and then reach a stable phase in this silage. And the quicker we can get this to happen, the less dry matter losses we're going to have. We're always going to have some dry matter losses, even in ideal fermentation. But the more quickly it can happen, the better off we are. Okay. So inoculants. What you want to do is you want to be sure to use a well-proven research-based inoculants. And the one thing I would say in recent years here, what out in the field work and research work has shown us is that the most effective inoculants have products containing a homolactic acid bacteria. And basically, a homolactic acid bacteria means that it's producing a single acid during that fermentation process. And what we're looking for is specifically lactic acid. And most of your really good products, this is the type of bacteria that they have in them. Make sure you got an adequate inventory before you start harvesting. Calibrate the applicator. The best place to put this on is at the chopper, because by the time it gets into storage, it's going to be well mixed. Store and mix the inoculant according to the label directions. Keep the product cool, especially on hot days, so you don't kill the bugs. We have found some cases where it didn't seem like the inoculant was doing much of anything. The tank on the self-propelled chopper was, guess where? Right next to the muffler on the chopper. That solution was so hot, it was like, it wasn't boiling, but it was really hot. We basically were killing the bugs in that tank. So take a look at what you're doing. You got to use some common sense. Sometimes you don't think about these things, but look at your situation. Don't mix more than you need. Most of these inoculants have a short shelf life. Check the label directions. Store it. If it's supposed to be stored in a refrigerator or freezer, be sure it is. Don't take a packet and throw it on the dashboard of the pickup truck and let it sit there for 2 or 3 days, riding around in the field. The hot sun through that windshield is probably going to basically ruin that product. So be sure you're being cautious. You spend some money on these products. We're looking for them to do the job for us. We need to be sure we're preserving the viability of these products. Here's some data that I dug up. I kind of thought, people need to know, is this stuff working for them? Here's some good guidelines, and many laboratories will actually do a fermentation analysis for you. And there's a column here for corn silage and one for high moisture corn. And these would be typical concentrations of some common fermentation end products in corn silage and high moisture with good fermentation, okay? Lactic acid, 4 to 7% in corn silage. Acetic down to 1 to 3. Butyric, we really don't want to see any there. Now, the one thing I would say is we talked about inoculants and these homolactic bacteria on the market, and they've been on the market for quite a period of time, and the salespeople do a pretty good job marketing these products. The other product that's out there is a Lactobacillus buchneri product, okay? This is a different type of inoculant, and there are actually some combination products out there. There are some products that actually have some enzymes, some sugar, some things to kind of kickstart the process a little bit. The Lactobacillus buchneri products, where you really need to think about those is if you have basically a lot of feed out problems. In other words, you have secondary fermentation. The feed is heating up in the feed bunk. You've got a face that's too wide. You can't keep up with it. This will really do a great job in reducing that secondary fermentation. However, this chart is not going to be very applicable because the Lactobacillus buchneri product will give you higher lactic acid. And that's what gives the silage its stability at feed out or in the feed bunk, especially during the summertime. So you're going to have lower lactic, higher acetic, and your pH is going to tend to be on the higher range a little bit. Now, the one thing I guess I would say is that if secondary fermentation and feed out problems are not a problem, there's no reason to use a product like Lactobacillus buchneri. It does slow down the fermentation process. Remember, I said the quicker we can get that pH to go down, the better off we are. Well, this tends to slow that down a little bit. So we do get a little bit more dry matter losses in the silage from a standpoint of the time it goes in to when we take it out. But if we have hot silage or silage that's heating up, we're going to have tremendous losses from the standpoint of productivity, palatability, and feed intake and production. So that's where this product can be quite valuable. So anyway, just wanted to kind of cover that. So key points, again, correct moisture, maturity, processing well, monitor kernel processing, fill it fast. We can't say enough about packing. You can't overpack. Reminds me of Eric will get a kick out of this. If any of you have ever watched the Seinfeld episodes.
Perfect pack.
Of a Seinfeld episode where Jerry was talking to George about somebody getting killed. Well, if somebody was stabbed and they're dead, they're already dead. If you shoot them, you can't kill them again. But it's the same thing with packing. If it's packed well, you can pack it some more, but you can't overpack. Okay. Seal it with a good cover, one of these silage, one of these oxygen limiting barriers. Consider an inoculant. I'll tell you, inoculants do really pay. It's hard to see that difference on a farm situation. When you're doing research, you can actually get down to the nitty-gritty details to pick those differences up. But the differences are there. They do pay. You need to pay attention, do a good job keeping them viable. Keep a tight, straight face at feed out, and basically try to design your feeding so that you're digging in deeper so to minimize reheating. Okay, and here's a photo. Actually, I don't know if there are even any cows in there, of Cornell's new dairy research center, just east of Ithaca. So with that, I'll stop.